All right, we are ready to start. Good afternoon, everybody who's here. So, before we get started, I just want to give a heads up that this stream's going to be a little bit different than the other ones that we've done in the past. So, obviously, during this stream, I'm going to be doing an interview with my twin brother. We're going to just talk about a few different questions, just chat, things like that. So, those of you who are here in the chat, in the beginning part of this, I'm neither of us are going to be really looking at the chat. We're going to just sort of be talking. But towards the end, we will be able to answer some questions if you have any that you want to ask. So, um, I, luckily, I have Miss Manzella was nice enough to offer to moderate the chat. So, just make sure you're appropriate, all that good stuff. But thank you for being here, and I'm gonna introduce my twin brother, Steve. So here's Steve. How you doing, Steve?
Hey Tim, happy Friday.
Yeah, it is Friday, which is good. Um, so for those of you who don't know, obviously, Steve is my twin brother. We grew up together. We went to college together, and Steve is 7 minutes older than I am. So let's start off with what do you do for work, and what does your job entail? Because I'm obviously a teacher, but you do something quite different from that.
Yeah, so I work in graphic design for live sports productions. Um, it's a little different from traditional graphic design where it kind of goes beyond just like designing what like the graphics look like. It's also involved with like the systems that are used to make graphics on the fly and insert them into a live production. So it's kind of a mixture of design, graphic design, and programming. Um, but yeah, I do that freelance, but I primarily work with NBC Sports, and then I do a lot of boxing with DAZN, which is like a streaming platform.
So when you're working on a show or a production or something, are you usually there in person, or is that not like is it mostly there in person, or is it not during the actual event?
So um, in the past, when I first started, I started off doing mostly boxing, and for those, I was on site. I hadn't wasn't really designing the graphics yet, but I was kind of just like working with the production and deciding like what the graphics should be. Just to clarify too, these graphics, it includes the clock that's running during an event. It includes somebody's name that pops up. Graphics with stats, things like that. So I I was on the road a lot working on remote productions. Now I primarily just kind of design and support the graphics. So I'm not actually at the productions anymore. And it's, now there isn't too much sports going on. So especially now.
Yeah, I was gonna ask about that. Um, so yeah, basically, if any of you have ever watched a sporting event on TV or somewhere, you've seen the graphics. It's whenever someone's name shows up, if there's a clock, all of that. But with yeah, like you said, with the whole quarantine and everything, there aren't a lot of sporting events going on. So what have you been doing in the meantime? Because you're still working for them, right?
Yeah. So I've been fortunate enough to still be working. Um, one of the things that, was a result of the coronavirus and everything was the Olympics was postponed a year. And you know, the work I do with NBC Sports, a lot of that involves the Olympics. So, we were kind of ramping up, preparing for the Olympics to start, in the next few months. That got postponed, but we're still kind of, doing some work with that. So um, there's a little bit of that happening. It's all very fluid and changing all the time. But now they're starting to bring some sports back. I know we do some like NASCAR that's starting up. A lot of motorsports, things like that, are kind of starting up again. So We still have the same kind of support we're doing. The production, the way that the production is set up is a little bit different because it has a lot of, social distancing guidelines in place and, things for the production people's safety. But, um, there's less going on, but there's still preparations happening and plans for more stuff to come back soon.
I didn't know that they were going to start doing NASCAR again. Are they just doing it with no people there? Or
Yeah, I mean, I think pretty much everything that's starting up again, they're not having any audiences just because it's limiting, how many people are in an enclosed space. But especially something like NASCAR, you have the drivers in their own cars and things like that. So I think there's, some more leeway with that. So I believe that's starting soon.
that's wild. That's so you've been doing graphics for things. Have you started doing graphics for NASCAR, I guess? Or
I mean, the work I do with NBC Sports, it kind of spans all the sports that they cover. So it includes NASCAR. I mean, it's everything from Sunday Night Football to like the Beverly Hills Dog Show. So it's anything that they cover. So it's very cool. I get to work on all different kinds of sports.
that's awesome. And how has it been? I'm assuming, well, I know that you've been working from home since
Hmm.
this whole thing started. How has it been working from home? Do you like it? Do you not like it?
Um, so one aspect of it is part of my job is supporting graphics that are on the road and all over the place. So we kind of had infrastructure in place to do work remotely before all this happened. So the transition wasn't too difficult for what my position is.
Hmm.
Um, and I like working from home, but I think just like everybody else, you reach a point where you know it'd be nice to get a little change of scenery and kind of have like a dedicated space for it. So I like it, but I think I have the same frustrations that most people have.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. There are aspects of it that I like, and then there are aspects where I wish I was actually physically at work as well. I'm going to come back to some stuff involving the coronavirus and all of that, but I do want to ask you because being an English teacher, something that my students ask me a lot is when am I going to be using the skills that I'm learning in English class in the future, and whether it's in a job or some other capacity. And the fact is that most people, when they go later on into life, whether they go to college or they go right to work, most people don't end up doing jobs where all they're doing is English things, unless you're an English teacher or an English professor. So, in your work career, the things that you do at your job, how do you maybe use some of the English related things that you maybe learned in high school or you learned in college, or and in general anything related to that?
Sure. When you think of like graphic design and things like that, um, you know something with English doesn't immediately pop into your head, but particularly with being in live sports production, it's beyond just designing the way a graphic looks. You also have to take into consideration, how you're going to populate that with content and how it's going to be used during a broadcast. And a lot of, during a sports broadcast, a lot of times the graphics serve a big purpose in kind of uh, building a narrative or like making a story happen that makes the viewer stay engaged. So there might be a graphic or something that's focusing on a certain player with a statistic, and then as the viewer, you can read that, and then you learn more about that person, you learn more about that team. So it's not dissimilar to reading a story or something like that. It's being engaged by like just watching a TV show or something like that. So when in my job, we need to just build the graphics to allow the production people to tell those stories and keep those narratives going.
Yeah, definitely. The When you mentioned that, the first thing that I thought of was with the NFL, how, well, last year because he got traded, but how Tom Brady was sort of this figure that to a lot of people was like an antagonist. And a lot of times things like the graphics or even some of the montages they put together, it sort of is trying to push this narrative and make it engaging. Because as you mentioned, and I talk to my students all the time about how the biggest thing that a story needs to keep the reader engaged is there has to be a conflict, and that's sort of your part of your job is making the viewer aware there's this conflict that's going on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, you could just have graphics and content during a broadcast that's just straight numbers and statistics, but part of the producer's job and the whole production team is you need to just build that story. And you do want an antagonist, you do want a protagonist. Even in many sports, you have characters like in boxing, you have someone like Floyd Mayweather, who's a major. He kind of makes himself this big antagonist, and he does it consciously. It makes people care about him, and kind of the promotion around him kind of just goes with that. So you're building this whole narrative, and it's kind of the same thing.
Yeah, but boxing especially, you see that. Um, you have in the production, you have your exposition where you're introducing the characters and all of that. And your graphics also serve a lot of that as well. You have to have background information on the athlete or the team going into it as well.
Yeah,
And
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 I'm and from that point, you know, there are a lot of tools now that can be used to tell that story. Like there's so much data and statistics out there that the production can pick certain statistics that tell that story, and there's all these resources where you can find that stuff.
yeah, that's awesome. And how often do you use like writing skills, just knowing correct spelling and grammar and things like that in your job?
I mean, spelling is massively important as a graphics operator. On top of actually designing the graphics, I also operate shows, and if especially if you're on a like broadcast television and you misspell something,
Yeah.
I mean, there's going to be articles about it on the internet, and people are going to be tweeting about it, and you're going to hear about it. So more than ever now with social media and things like that, you're gonna get tons of feedback if something like that happens. So it's definitely an important skill to have. Grammar too. If you have some kind of grammar thing, that's going to get pointed out by somebody that's watching.
Yeah, and we talk about in my class about how aside from just being able to understand the information, having correct spelling and grammar also gives credibility to what you're saying. And if you're if you're watching a production and there's an error like that, the viewer might think, "Oh, I, why do I why am I watching this? Why do I trust what this information is if it's not at least presented correctly?" Yeah, definitely. It's funny because um we talked a little bit about this beforehand, but as we're talking about it, I just keep on thinking of other ways that a lot of the things that I'm doing in my classes can apply. And also, I teach public speaking and advanced public speaking. And in your job, you're not on the production, you're not like a commentator or anything, but is there any situation in your job where having at least, passable public speaking skills is helpful?
Um, Partially, it's definitely a different, it's a different medium. Um, you might not be standing in front of a camera talking, but you're still, you're passing a message along. So it has to be the message has to be clear. And I mean, clarity with the graphics themselves is important too. In the same, when if you're a public speaker, you want to be concise, you want to, hit your points, things like that. The same can go into, having a graphic for something that you're passing along a piece of information, and this includes, the way it's laid out, the legibility, things like that. So there's a lot of similar ideas in that, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And then during this pandemic, have you had to do any meetings, like Zoom meetings or remote meetings, things like that?
All the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. um, I think it's kind of become the new standard. So, and I mean, it's important to have that sort of like face to face contact when you can't be in the same room with somebody. So, um, yeah, I've certainly been on camera more than ever during this, and I think it's something that everybody's starting to get more comfortable with, just because you have to adapt to it.
Yeah, I think that a lot of people now, um, public speaking skills and just having some sort of awareness of things like your mannerisms when you're on these Zoom calls all day. Because I've spoken to multiple people, and now their job is mostly doing these Zoom meetings and being aware of the things that you're doing, which is a big public speaking skill we talk about, definitely would help in that situation. I'm gonna skip to a question. So during this time where we're all sort of stuck at home and we can leave our houses, but we can't go out and do more interactive things or go to certain places, what are some things that you've been doing to just pass the time when you're not working?
So, I've been just spending a lot of time home with my wife. We've been watching a lot of movies. We've been playing video games, things like that. I've been playing some video games.
Hmm.
I've been, trying to cook. Um, I'm fortunate enough to have my wife here, so she's great company. So we have good times together. Yeah, I mean, there are some like personal work things, and so I'm a freelancer. I kind of have little projects and things going on, and I try to stay productive and work on these. And you see, people are always saying, you have the time, make the best of it. You should be doing all this stuff. But personally, I think it's good to be doing those things. It's good productive work you could be doing, but we're all stuck in the same position. So I think people should just be doing things they enjoy, and something that's not necessarily can be like quantified as being really productive is always the most necessary thing. So I've been just having fun. Like I said, lots of movies and video
Yeah.
games and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I've had the same sort of thing where I feel like I need to be productive doing a bunch of things that are, traditionally considered productive, whether that's doing some creative project or doing something sort of related to work all the time. But I found out that, you know, so sometimes the most productive thing you can do is just take a step back and relax a little bit and recharge. So, yeah, definitely. I've been realizing that same thing.
Yeah, and it's been very important, to stay in touch with family and friends, and especially with the way technology is now, everybody's so accessible. So although it's hard to get together, it's easier than ever to give somebody a call, say what's up, see their face, you know, share a conversation.
Yeah, definitely. I think that this whole experience for me at least, it's made me realize that I have all of these people that I can reach out to at any time, and it's made me more grateful for the things that I have that maybe I can't readily access right now.
Yeah, we're
Definitely.
definitely very fortunate to have a lot of these things.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So I'm gonna shift a little bit because I had posted on Google Classroom today that students could submit questions that they wanted to ask you. So, one we sort of were just talking about a little bit, so I'll go back to it. Andreas had asked if you are also a gamer. But before I do that, I have to clarify something. Um, I have been playing video games more than I usually do during this quarantine. I don't know if I would call myself a gamer because I don't know if I take it quite as seriously as some other people do, but if that's quantified as just someone who plays video games, I definitely do. Um, but so you don't have to classify yourself as a gamer or not. But what you mentioned you've been playing some video games. What kind of stuff have you been playing?
So yeah, I like playing video games. To be honest, I really didn't play many video games before all this stuff happened with being home all the time because I was commuting to and from work and just didn't really have too much time to. But now having more time at home, I've been playing more. My wife and I play a lot of Crash Team Racing on PlayStation, which is good racing game. Uh, it's fun to do, and then I play a couple computer games, things like that. But I mean, yeah, I mean, I'm kind of in the same boat as you. I wouldn't say I'm an avid gamer, things like that, but I definitely have been enjoying playing video games.
Yeah, I think it's a great way to pass the time. And also it's a great way to interact with people as well. And I have Andreas is in the chat right now and he clarified that he just meant someone who plays video games. So I guess in that definition, I guess we would both be considered
Yeah,
that.
I'd say so. Yes.
Definitely. Okay. We also had George had asked what your hobby is. So do you have a certain hobby that you enjoy, maybe prominently more than just, everyday things?
Sure. I like playing music. I play guitar. I play drums also, but I can't have a drum set here in my apartment. But yeah, that's definitely one of my hobbies I enjoy. That's actually, that's kind of a thing that, I feel like during, being in quarantine or whatever, it's something where it's like, oh, well, I'm going to play so much guitar. I'm going to do all this stuff. And I've played guitar, but, you know, not an insane amount. Um, but, I don't feel bad. I've been doing other stuff. So, but yeah, I like playing music and making music.
Awesome. We had two similar questions submitted by Fernando had asked, did either of you guys get in trouble, but your twin brother got the blame because of mistaken identity? And then also, Jamil had asked if we had ever switched places. So those are some classic twin questions
Yeah, I
right
heard,
there.
heard those a lot.
Yeah. So, did we ever switch places?
I don't think so. I mean, I think I, I don't know. Maybe like some like small time for some small thing, but I think like when you're a twin, you just hear that so much that it's almost like I don't even want to because everybody's always asking about switching places all the time. So I don't really think we did that. And as far as like getting in trouble, I don't really think that happened either. I can't think of a time like that.
Yeah, I think there might have been one day where we tried to switch our seats in homeroom or something, but we were right next to each other, and the teacher called it out immediately. So I think after that, I don't think we ever tried to do that again. And yeah,
Yeah,
I can't remember a time where one of us got in trouble, but I will give an abridged version of one story that involves mistaken identity with us. We both in high school worked at Dunkin' Donuts, and um, after a little bit, I believe you decided you didn't want to work there anymore, so you submitted your 2 weeks notice. So 2 weeks notice is where you tell your job that you're leaving, but you have to give notice before you leave. But I didn't. I wanted to keep working there. And after 2 weeks pass and it's time for Steve to end his job, I went into work and looked at the schedule, and both of us were taken off the schedule. So my assumption is that they couldn't remember which one of us quit, and they just took both of us off the schedule. So I never worked there again. That
yeah.
might,
I guess that would go in the category I think of
yeah. I mean,
maybe not getting in trouble, but
yeah, we didn't get in trouble, but yeah. Some people in the chat are asking about your guitar. What kind of guitar do you have?
I have a Fender Telecaster, American. It's a good one. It's like it's kind of inspired by Bruce Springsteen. It's
Nice,
I love it. It's really nice. And then I also have my wife has a guitar also. She is a Squire Jaguar. But
awesome.
I started playing guitar a long time ago. My first guitar was a Squire Strat.
Yeah, I used to play bass, and I had an Epiphone, I think, an SG.
Yeah, I
They're
think so.
they're asking to see your guitar. Maybe after.
My guitar is in the case at the moment.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Let's see. Oh, so right now in our advanced public speaking class, we are working on what I'm referring to as a digital artifact. So it's the students can produce either a podcast or an interview or a news story. And we had a question from Yaren about sound effects in a podcast and when to use them. Now, I don't know if you've ever created a podcast, but I know that you've listened to some podcasts. So, what's your opinion on when would be a good time to use a sound effect in a podcast? Do you think it would be she suggested either low in the background or when someone's not speaking? What do you think about that?
So I think it's kind of a pretty sensitive thing with sound effects in podcasts. I think they can be overused sometimes for sure. And something like a comedy podcast, I feel like they can, they get thrown in to like, be funny, like
Mm-hmm.
sound drops and things like that. Um, and then there's other podcasts like Radio Lab, which WNYC does or NPR,
Mm-hmm.
and they have sound effects, but it's kind of what she mentioned with kind of like low in the background and things like that. So um, I think it's better when it's something subtle that kind of helps it move along a little bit. You definitely want it to be a supplementary thing. It shouldn't be like the primary thing that's there. But that's my opinion. I'm sure there's other people who think differently.
Yeah, definitely. There are so many different ways to use them. I also think it depends on the subject matter of the podcast. Like you mentioned, if your podcast is based on comedy and it's meant to be funny, then you might have more prominent sound effects that are maybe a little over the top on purpose. But then Radiolab, as you mentioned, which if anybody watching this has never listened to a Radiolab podcast, they're great. They're really interesting stories and they're produced really, really well. But then maybe it'll be more subdued. So yeah, my advice to that question would be, you just don't want it to be overpowering. Yeah, she said she's doing a podcast about sleep paralysis. So with that, if you have something that'll sort of, if you're describing something like an experience you went through, if you have a sound effect that can give an example of it, then that would be a good way to use it. As far as putting those sound effects behind your own speaking or afterwards, I would sort of try both and see which one you think sounds better.
Yeah, I mean, I think something maybe if it's something subtle, it might work if it's a little lower in the mix and it's behind while you're speaking, and that way it's not emphasized as much as if there's no talking during it. It really depends on the content, but if it's like sleep paralysis, I that's like more of a serious thing, I'd say. So you wouldn't want to make it seem like cartoony or something like that with too much sound effects.
Yeah, absolutely. So we still have a few minutes left. So I'm going to ask anybody who's here in the chat if you have a question for Steve or for both of us, you can just put it in the chat. But while we do that and maybe see if anybody has any questions, I do have one other question for you that sort of involves English, which is as far as reading. Do you like to read? And if you do, what kind of books do you like?
I do like to read. I kind of go through phases where I'll like read a lot and then I kind of won't read as much and then I'll kind of pick it back up again. But I do like reading. I like like science fiction sort of books, things like that. Like I like books like Dune and like Arthur C. Clarke and Isaac Asimov, things like that. Right now, I'm reading Lord of the Rings, which I've never read before. When I was in school, maybe like high school or middle school, I don't remember. I read The Hobbit and liked it, and I don't remember much beyond that. But I really like the Lord of the Rings movies, so figured I'd read the book. So I read Fellowship of the Ring, and it was great. And now I'm reading Two Towers.
Awesome. I've only read The Hobbit and I love the movies, so I want to watch those. Read those as well. Yeah, I've read a couple of you've recommended a bunch of sci-fi books to me and I've looked at a couple of them, but I know that those Isaac Asimov books, I know you really like them and I definitely want to check those out. And I know how about this? This question wasn't one that we this wasn't one that we asked beforehand, but was there a book that you read in school that stuck with you a little bit?
Um, Probably 1984. It's the kind of book where it's probably the book I read in school that I like remember the most about, just because it resonated so much. And I think like that sort of subject matter is like really relevant all the time.
Hmm.
So I still really like that book. I like George Orwell a lot.
Yeah, I loved teaching that book. It was one of my favorite books to teach as well. Awesome. All right, so we have a few questions here. Both Dean and Adam asked who was the favorite between the two of us. I mean,
And with who?
I,
With our
I'm
parents?
I'm assuming our parents. I will say if there was a favorite, our parents did a great job of hiding it because I don't know.
Yeah, I'd say pretty equal.
And then Karina asked, growing up, who was the troublemaker?
I let you answer that, Tim.
I don't really think. See, there's this thing with twins where people assume there always has to be a favorite. There has to be one who was a troublemaker. I think that we sort of defy that kind of thing because I mean, we sometimes got in trouble for like, nothing serious, like
I
being
mean, yeah,
rough.
it's siblings, you know,
Yeah.
siblings fighting with each other, sort
Yeah.
of standard stuff. It's not, it's not twin specific. Um,
Yeah, so I don't know.
I wouldn't call either of us troublemakers.
Yeah, I think if I said one of us was a troublemaker, it would be insulting to troublemakers. Um, so, and Iris, this is more of a comment, but she said, "Thank you for letting Mr. Belmont use your Netflix account. Twilight Zone was the best freshman year. I made it a point to tell everybody that when we would watch something on Netflix, you were letting me use your account. So thank you for that."
Sharing is caring.
That's right. And then she also said the last question by Isaac Asimov is very intriguing. I believe that's a short story.
I
I
haven't I haven't read that. I've heard of it. I've read a few Asimov books. I've read like some of the Foundation books, but I've heard of that, but I haven't read it.
Mhm. And then Dean also asked what your favorite band is.
My favorite band.
So I'll say that I get this question from students every once in a while. And I mean, I get it from anybody really. And for me, it changes because I like so many different kinds of music depending on what mood I'm in and where I'm at in life. So it's very difficult for me to choose a favorite band.
Yeah, that's a tough one. There isn't like a real solid number one. I like a lot of different kinds of music. Um, I'll give you two. I'd say let's go with Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band and Black Sabbath.
Two solid picks.
Yeah, pretty wide spectrum, but
Yeah, and I think those are two bands that they have enough different kinds of songs where you could listen to them really at any time. And Karina thinks we're lying about neither of us being troublemakers, but
I mean,
we're not lying.
no lies.
All right, so I'm gonna do last call here for questions. Um, so wow, I went through all the questions that I wrote down. Um,
Excellent.
yeah, we got through all the planned stuff. Oh, Raul wants to know something you've been listening to recently.
I've been listening to a lot of Steely Dan recently. It's good, listen while I'm doing work, things like that. Steely Dan's great. Our parents listened to Steely Dan when we were growing up, and when I was younger, I was kind of felt like I had to be rebellious and not like anything that our parents liked.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I really like Steely Dan.
Yeah, it's great. Good pick. Um, Karina also asked, "Do any of you guys watch anime?" So I know I have friends who really like anime, and I've gotten a lot of recommendations, but I will admit that I've only watched episodes here and there of different series. I know that from my experience, it seems like that most people, you really got to sink your teeth into a series to fully appreciate it. Real quick, I just want to give a shout out um to our cousin Katie who's in chat. So hi Katie, thanks for
Hi,
stopping
Katie.
by. So what's your experience with that?
I have not seen too much. When Pokemon was really big, kind of like the first wave of it, I saw some of that, and that was kind of. I mean, I don't know historically if that was like a first major introduction to anime for a lot of people, but that was probably the first I saw. And at the time, I didn't even know what anime was. It was just Pokemon was really popular. Beyond that, and you would know this too, Tim. Our grandma had a VHS tape of My Neighbor Totoro.
Mm-hmm.
So not sure where that came from, but we would watch that a lot, and that holds up pretty good.
Yeah, I want to see that again because we watched that when we were little, and then later we kept hearing about how it's one of the greats. So we'll have to
Yeah,
revisit it.
I watched it fairly recently, um, in the past few years, and I liked it.
Awesome. Adam had asked, since you work with sports, what are your favorite sports to work with? So is there a certain sport that you like the most?
So I am very passionate about working with boxing because I've been doing it for a really long time. Um, I like boxing. It's I've done the most like remote productions. I've been able to travel all over the country working on boxing, so that's definitely up there. And then it's very cool to work on some high profile stuff like doing graphics for Sunday Night Football or the NHL, uh, those sorts of things. It's all different and it's very cool. And I get to work with a lot of other really talented artists and being able to kind of take the stuff they design and make it work in a live production is really fulfilling and fun to do.
Awesome. Yeah, our family has a storied history of working with boxing. Our grandmother's brother was a boxing trainer. So our whole family is involved in the boxing world. So it's something that we've been around our whole lives. I remember going to fights when we were little and just being in the TV truck and seeing the experience and then hearing all about it. So, yeah, that definitely makes sense.
Yeah, and that's my introduction into the whole industry was through boxing.
Awesome. All right. So, I think we're going to start to wrap it up here. Um, oh, we do have another question. Nick had asked if you ever meet any athletes because of your job.
So most of the work I do now, I'm not actually there on the field, um, at the events and things like that. I do see some, personalities and stuff around. I've met Mike Tirico isn't an athlete, but he's a major commentator. I have more interactions with commentators than athletes. Yeah, nothing too crazy. I've met some boxers and things like that. I've met Oscar De La Hoya. Um, I've met I've met some boxers. That's probably about it.
Not to call you out, but we were talking the other day about how you had the opportunity to meet Mike Tyson and you decided to not.
Yeah, I feel weird like walking up to somebody who's famous and like saying hello. I've definitely had opportunities where I could have gone up and introduced myself, but I always just feel really awkward. And with someone like Mike Tyson, I end up regretting it. But you know, got to be a friend, not a fan.
Yeah, I hear you. That definitely towing a line there. Absolutely.
I don't want to make anybody uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm. All right. So I think we're going to wrap this up now. We've been talking for about 40 minutes. But before we go, I want to thank you, Steve, for coming by and chatting and
Thanks for
giving,
having me.
yeah, of course, giving some insight into your life and your job and all of that. And also talking a little bit about English. Because to put a little bow on this right now, in my English class right now, and in fact, probably in most English classes, we're wrapping up the research paper right now. And it's something where in life, in most jobs, you don't have to sit down and write a research paper. But the thing is, a lot of the skills that we're doing leading up to the final paper are skills that can be applied in really any job that you use. Things like keeping organized and communicating and using spelling and grammar and all of that is something that could really apply to most jobs. So, I mean, I'm sure in your job working in graphics, you're not writing research papers, but there are skills that could come from doing a process like that that you could apply to your job now.
Yeah, definitely. Especially with building kind of infrastructure and systems that need to work with specific sports. Organization is really important, and you're kind of setting it up so the production can do their job efficiently. So, um, yeah, it's that kind of structure really makes things easier.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming by, Steve. And thank you to everybody who is watching, everybody in the chat right here. And I will talk to everybody later. All right. Bye, Steve, and goodbye, everybody in chat.
Bye, thanks.
Bye, everybody.